Hello everyone, I'm sorry for the delay. We had some technical problems, but let's start. Let's talk about disability. In lieu of an introduction, if you're comfortable talking about it, what's your personal experience with disability?
Well, I was diagnosed with autism when I was 14 and with ADD when I was 23, and I've had a lot of on and off mental health issues. I write disabled characters pretty much exclusively at this point, which wasn't a conscious choice but just kind of happened. And I am a co-founder and moderator of Disability in Kidlit, which, as you could probably guess from the name, discusses disability in children's literature. I think that's it.
So is it my turn now that we don't have
Yes.
Fox? Okay.
Yeah, Fox.
I am trying to find you. Okay. I'm Catherine Locke. I have had mental illnesses my entire life. I had an eating disorder for 12 to 14 years, depending on who you ask, myself or my therapist. And I also have an autoimmune disease.
Is it my turn? Okay. I couldn't tell if you were still talking.
No,
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Kayla Whaley. I was born with a disease that's called spinal muscular atrophy, type 3, for the specific kind. It's a form of muscular dystrophy. Essentially, it means that my muscles are weaker than most people's. So I stopped walking at age 6, and I use a power wheelchair. I also recently was diagnosed with depression. But yeah, that's me. I'm also, along with Bryn, an editor at Disability Kidlit, and I haven't yet written much about disability in terms of fiction, although I'm working on it, but my essays almost entirely deal with disability. So
That was going to be my next question. If you as a writer have written about disability, whether in fiction or non-fiction, and if you want to talk a bit about it.
In my debut novel, Otherbound, which is a fantasy young adult novel that came out 2 years ago, almost to the day. It was 2 years on Friday. Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
There are 2 protagonists, and one has an amputated foot, and the other had her tongue cut out at a very young age. So they both deal with disability in a different way. And in my second novel, On the Edge of Gone, which is a young adult science fiction novel that came out this March, the main character is autistic. And I've also got several novels in the works featuring characters with everything from deafness to anxiety to lots and lots of other things. So it's kind of a toss-up which will get published first of those. But those 2 novels are the big ones right now.
I wrote a new adult series called the District Ballet series. The first book is Second Position, the second book is Finding Center, and then there's a prequel novella called Turning Point. And in those books, the heroine, Allie, is recovering from an eating disorder and has pretty severe depression and anxiety. And in Second Position and Finding Center, and this isn't too much of a spoiler, Zed, after a car accident, is a left leg amputee above the knee, and he uses a prosthetic and crutches. So I wrote those books first. My young adult book does not have somebody with, the young adult book coming out next year does not have somebody with a disability, but the book following that, my 2018 book, does. So I'm working it in, writing queer Jewish girls with various mental health issues, pretty much as far as I can see down the line.
So yeah, like I mentioned, I have written a fair number of essays about my own disability, / disabilities, but I haven't yet written any fiction much with it. I have a middle grade book that is not out yet, obviously. I don't have any books out yet, but that anxiety as a thread through it, even though it's not the main point of the book. And I'm currently working on a YA romance that stars a wheelchair user, which I'm very excited about.
I'm so excited about that one too. It's gonna be amazing.
I love the Twitter quote.
Same.
So yeah, we'll see how that goes, but that's what I'm working on right now.
What are some of the tropes you've seen which are hurtful and disrespectful?
Okay, so I have been doing disability kitlit for almost 3 years now, so I can talk about this for literally 3 years, and I'm still going. So that's kind of hard to answer in such a short amount of time, so I'll just focus on my own conditions right now. So for autism, one of the big tropes is commonly held belief in real life, which is autistic people don't have empathy, which is usually wrong in like 99% of cases, and also extremely damaging and harmful. And with autism, the main thing is also that most novels featuring autistic characters focus instead on all the characters around them and how autism affects the sister or the parents or whatever, and the autistic character themselves is mostly just a prop for other people's characters, which is also not a great thing. And the autistic behaviors are generally just reduced to thoughtless stereotypes. Like, there's never a reason behind it. It's just some funny thing the autistic character does because they're autistic, even though we always have reasons for what we do. And in terms of ADD, it's actually not portrayed in fiction all that often, so there aren't that many stereotypes or tropes, but I think the main thing is that people will see ADD only as the funny ADHD, haha, oh look, a squirrel, which is hilarious because as Katie and Kayla can both testify, I go, oh my god, it's a squirrel, like, oh,
quite literally.
Really like squirrels.
I really like squirrels, okay? But I haven't really seen any characters in fiction with that I can sympathize with in that aspect because none of them have the type of ADD that I do, which is so much more about distractibility and inability to make decisions, inability to focus, all of that stuff. And you just don't see that at all, really, unfortunately.
The first thing I should say, since they probably won't say it, is that writers who are interested in writing disability should definitely check out Disability in Kidlit. There are really good interviews on there, and there are book reviews and discussions about tropes. It's probably the #1 resource for writing and reading about disability in all levels of children's literature. So definitely check it out. The biggest problems that I see around mental illness specifically are handling of suicide and suicidal thoughts in literature, is that it's often quickly cured, something where like the main character falls in love and they're no longer depressed or suicidal, or another character commits suicide and the main character realizes how much they want to live. That's pretty problematic. We also Disability in Kidlit for Why. I'm just going to keep plugging it for you guys.
How about we just put a link to the website here, and then the three of us just like spend the entire hour flirting with each other.
Well,
fine,
yeah,
sure.
The other thing is anything with mental illness is the trope that falling in love cures you of mental illness, and that mental illness is something that is fleeting. And sometimes it is. Sometimes somebody has a situational depression where they have anxiety about a specific event, but having anxiety about taking a test is not the same as having an anxiety disorder. And I think those things and those experiences get conflated very quickly. In terms of eating disorder literature, you can always tell when an author has had a personal experience and when an author has just read the internet. Eating disorders are not about numbers, and they're not about looking pretty for prom. Even if the sufferer thinks that it's about the number, or about looking pretty for prompt. They're always about something more, and they are very deeply intertwined, and there's a lot of comorbidity with other mental illnesses. There are very few eating disorder books that get it right, and that is something that drives me absolutely crazy, because I think when you get something wrong like that, people with disabilities, actually, across the board, seek out literature to see themselves. They're looking for mirrors, and when that mirror is reflecting something that's toxic or damaging, that can make that person suffer more or greater or in silence, and that is so dangerous.
Yeah, co-sign all of the above. So I guess I'll talk about specifically tropes to do with wheelchair users, because as you can tell, there are so many disability tropes out there that we are literally incapable of covering them all. But the main ones that I see, and the ones that bug me the most, is like this false dichotomy of wheelchair user as saint and wheelchair user as villain, and that extends across the board to pretty much all disabilities they have. You see that a lot regardless of disability, but you see it especially with wheelchair users, I find. So we are either childlike and innocent and angels sent from heaven to bless the world with our presence and our kindness and our innate goodness, or we are bitter and angry at the world because we can't use stairs, and we just bring sadness and terror to everything we touch, basically. Those are sort of the two archetypes you see of wheelchair user characters. In terms of narratives, you also see a lot of death is better than being disabled, which we saw recently with the film Me Before You, which was based on a book called Me Before You about a man who is quadriplegic and he chooses to die, which is problematic for a lot of reasons. I will say that assisted suicide narratives can be done well, but they're very, very tricky to do well, and this one did not.
Yeah. I think if you're going to do an assisted suicide narrative, maybe make it about the disabled person and not their love interest and how they need to live and get lots of money.
Pretty much, yeah. That's the gist of it, really. But yeah.
How do you think people and writers should fight these stereotypes?
Visit www.disability.com.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm working on an article about this because it is complicated. Because, well, like pretty much everything, disability, it's a big spectrum, and everybody experiences it differently. So I might talk about something that I think is bad in autism narratives, and I don't ever want to see again because it's damaging. And then someone else who's autistic might go, "Oh, I love that." So it's not always as easy as in how to avoid it because people aren't always going to agree. So I think rather than trying to find like magic rules to follow, just try to listen and learn. Like if I will never say this is wrong and I will say, hey, I think this can be damaging for this and this reason. Have you considered doing it like this? And so I think that's one of the really big things is understand why we're talking about certain things. So do your research and really try to understand why something is this way, because there are some tropes that I will, complain about or whatever, but I've also seen those same tropes done well in some cases because it's all about how you approach it. And it can be either averted or disconstructed or anything. So I think the number one point is to just understand what we're talking about. Listen to disabled people and try to see where they're coming from. And especially try to see where they're coming from in the wider real-life context. Like if I talk about why it's a problem that there are so many narratives that focus on autistic people getting better, it's not just because I don't like it as a story narrative, it's because there's real-life implications, because a lot of autistic children are literally tortured, and like that sounds really dramatic, but I'm not making it up. UN actually classified it as legitimate, official, legal torture, because people want to make them better. So when you uphold that as like the ideal for an autistic person, that's what you're reinforcing. All these stories, they don't happen in a vacuum, and they have so many implications, and there's so many dangerous ideas of autism and other conditions that they uphold. So get why we complain about the tropes, but also please, please, please learn about real life and all the shit that people face and all the dangerous, political sides, because unfortunately a lot of this is political. It's not just about us being tired of a certain trope, like, oh, I know how the story ends. It's about, I know what this means people think of me, and I know that people reading this book will now have those notions reinforced and might, cause legit harm for real-life disabled people, no matter how, how well-intentioned they are.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah, I would agree, especially with the listening to disabled people and using sensitivity and beta readers. And when you use sensitivity beta readers, one, I get asked to beta read a lot of things that are just mental illness, but not my mental illness. And my experience with depression, anxiety, OCD is very different than somebody's experience with dissociative identity disorder, and I should not be beta reading something for DID. I also shouldn't be reading something for binge eating disorder. These are not all the same. It's not a monolith. So make sure that you're asking somebody to read specifically for what is in your book. If you don't know what's in your book, you're not ready to write that book yet. Fairly compensate your beta readers and your sensitivity readers and listen to them. If they come back and they say, this is super problematic, this is inspiration porn, your disabled character solely exists to give your main character like a meaning in life, don't be like, well, you're wrong, that's not what I meant. You have to actually listen to them and implement their changes, and their changes might be scrapping the whole book. The changes might be shelving that book for the next 3 years until you're ready to reevaluate the core of the story. And you have to be okay with that, because your right to tell a story is not greater than the reader's right not to be harmed. And we're talking about actual harm here by dangerous, inauthentic, is that a word? I'm a writer. Inauthentic experiences. There are books out there that are really dangerous for people with disabilities to read, and very, very harmful, and that I am not an advocate of book burning or censorship, but I am sad for the people that pick up those books. And I don't want to put more of those books into the world. So, second position, one of the characters is an Own Voices character. Allie has a lot of my mental health issues, but Zed doesn't. I can't experience life as somebody who is an amputee, who uses a prosthetic, who has mobility issues in the world, and I used beta readers and sensitivity readers who were like, really, this is a basic life thing, that's not how that works. This is how it works. And yes, it required going back and editing the book at the last minute for a couple of things, but it made the book a better book. And it made that experience for Zed more authentic. And only one of my readers is also a left leg above the knee amputee. But for that one reader, if I make the difference, if I told that story more authentically, then that is really important. So it mattered. Just one reader is important. We're not talking, you don't have to say, well, 99% of my readers won't have this disability, so it doesn't matter. It matters for that one reader.
Yeah, strong agree with everything those two said. Now I want to talk about, since you guys have covered like listening to disabled readers and getting sensitivity readers and stuff, I want to talk about like way before you even start any of that, like dismantle what you think about disability in general first. Like before you go hunting for specifics about what you want to cover, or definitely before you talk to any disabled people about what you're writing, think about what you know or what you think you know about disability and analyze it. Like really interrogate, why do I think this way? What media have I consumed that has reinforced this idea? Why might it be problematic? What might be another way to look at it? And like just really think about it, because so much of what we ingest stays with us no matter what. And you have to work to dig that out. You have to work before you can start writing to sort of re-educate yourself, like rethink about disability and question what you know, because so much of it is going to be wrong. You live in an ableist society, so you have necessarily consumed ableist media and ableist ideas, and those are in you. So you have to find them first, route them out, and then you can start the work of writing a truer, more authentic, more nuanced and sympathetic narrative. But you have to do that work first before you ever put pen to paper. And I would argue before you even put the thought in your head to write it. So.
You've spoken about sensibility reads and beta readers. What's the best way, you think, to ask people for a sensitivity read? Because not everyone might want to do it, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's why there's not really a good answer. Like, I sometimes approach friends about it. I've also approached strangers about it. And sometimes I shouldn't have. Like, sometimes approaching a stranger out of the blue is creepy. Like, they're just doing their thing, you know? So I don't think there's a good answer. I think if you're gonna do it, make sure that first you have done as much research and everything as you can. Like, getting this reader or a consultant should not be your first option. You should already have done so much research, because you're not getting them to do the work for you. You're doing the work and they're helping you with it. That's all. Be polite, and if at all possible, try to offer money, because they're not, doing you a favor. This is work, and they're putting in a lot of effort in this, both time-wise and thought-wise, but also because doing this can be very difficult, because you can see very sometimes reading these things hurts or is damaging, or it can put you in a really bad mind space. And being put in this position where you basically have to educate someone can also be very difficult for people. So I know it's not always going to be possible, and if you know the person or if you're established beta readers, the situation might be different, but in general, try to pay people. And, disabled people are kind of underrepresented in the workforce as is, so most will appreciate that and will need that. So yeah, I don't think there's a good answer. I think try to be polite, try to realize they do not owe you anything at all. You are not doing them a favor by writing about them. Mm-hmm. So I think those are my main points.
Yeah, I think that point that you're not doing them a favor by writing about them is really important to keep in mind. There is a thing called Write in the Margin, RITE, which has a database of sensitivity readers for all types of things, as well as a recommended payment. I have had good luck putting it out on Twitter and just saying, is anybody interested in doing a sensitivity read for X, Y, or Z? And that way people are coming to me, and I'm not forcing myself into anyone else's space. And then we can take it to on email. I tell them more about the story. I give them essentially a fake query of it and say, here's the synopsis. If this is not your thing, totally fine. If you see a problem now, that's totally fine. Like, how can we, whatever your comfort level is, where I am okay, so that I meet them where they are. I have used one beta reader or sensitivity reader for second position in Finding Center for Zed, who was a fellow writer, and what I found it for various other books that I'm writing with marginalized experiences that are not mine. And that's been the best way, is to put it out on Twitter. It gets retweeted. people come to me, and then we discuss in private. And some of them, once they hear about the book, are like, "Oh, I super can't read about that. My family went through genocide. That's not something I'm interested in reading. It's going to be too traumatic." Or some of them are like, "Wow, I super hate fantasy." And as we heard in the first panel, I pretty much hate fantasy. So, yeah, meeting them where they are, being very open-minded, being very sympathetic and empathetic about the fact that reaching out to them might mean that you're putting them at risk for microaggressions and for pain and for having to educate you, which is exhausting physically and emotionally, and being a good person and actually listening to them, not being a jerk and arguing.
Not being a jerk is a really good one.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. Like, I've done beta reads for Jewish characters, and there have been some real jerks that come back and they argue with you about your own experience, and you're like, no, that's not how that works. So don't.
I've been lucky.
Yeah, definitely agree with all of that. I will say, too, that to go along with what Katie said about meeting them where they are, I find it's really helpful when I've done sensitivity reads for people if the person I'm reading for in the initial email makes me aware, like makes sure that I know that I can back out at any time, that they are fully like willing to listen to what I have to say and to make big changes if that's what I need to tell them. So it really, really helps to know going in that the other person is not only aware of how difficult this can potentially be, but that they're willing to make the big changes, to do the work that they need to do to make it as great as they can. Because I've also had experiences where that hasn't been told to me up front, and even if it's gone well, it makes it that much more nerve-wracking because I don't know. And I mean, you don't know even if they say, yes, they're going to listen, yes, they're going to fine if you drop out, whatever. But it's a little extra reassurance that maybe this time you don't have to like brace yourself as hard. So that helps me at least to, I don't know, approach the project a little less warily, which can take some of the pressure off, I've found. So yeah, making sure that you're not just barging into people's faces and making sure that you are open to everything that they have to say. That doesn't mean you have to take everything they say necessarily if it's not like, I mean, sometimes you're going to have feedback that isn't, oh gosh, there's my cat. Now I'm distracted.
Sorry.
Yes, my point is, with sensitivity reading, unlike with regular beta reading, you need to carefully consider literally everything the beta reader says. But with regular beta reading here, too, you don't always have to implement everything exactly as they say, but have reasons why you're choosing not to. Like, don't just ignore the advice because you don't feel like doing it, or because you think it's not good advice, or that it's not their real experience, or whatever. Like, if you're gonna ignore something, have a really, really, really good reason why, and be able to articulate that. Because, like we've talked about, this is not just about writing a good story, this is about not causing harm to actual real-life people. So Corinna is just having a real hard time, I can tell, not, like, talking
Totally
about this cat. So I'm going to stop because I'm repeating myself anyway.
I do actually want to keep going based on this because, like you said, you need to be willing to make the big changes. So one thing that I've discussed a couple times with Cody Keplinger, who co-founded Disability Kitlet, was that a lot of times when writers try to find beta readers, sensitivity readers, they're not so much looking for how can I make this story better, but for a pat on the back and maybe one or two lines to tweak. A lot of the time people approach beta readers too late in the process when the story is already mostly set in stone and they either can't or aren't willing to make huge changes. But in some cases, the problem really is in the core concept or in a huge story arc that's like woven throughout the entire book. So it's kind of difficult actually to figure out at what stage you need to get a sensitivity reader, because on one hand you want to get it early enough that you can catch all the big stuff and still have enough time and flexibility to be able to make significant changes and do further research if need be. But on the other hand, you also want to get them late enough in the process that you've already been able to do a lot of research and that you've been able to work through a lot of problems on your own so that you know specifically also what you're asking. Because sometimes there are specific problems that you might think like, oh, hey, I'm worried about this character, maybe being an example of this and this trope. I try to, ameliorate it by doing this, but I worry, blah, blah, blah. Thinking things through by yourself. And if you're going to someone too early, there might still be all kinds of situations that will pop up later that you don't know at that stage. So it's really difficult actually about when to approach. So I might, if you have a friend who is part of this group, I might just try to get them really early on and just like run your major ideas past them in like a chat conversation, nothing official. Or again, just get a consultant who knows about this stuff. So this is not like a read my manuscript way, but like let me run this idea past you. And then later, when you've actually got it written, you can get a proper read. Because I think both of those stages are essential. And on that note, when I've been approached about beta reading, it has been really helpful to me for people to explain what they are doing or what they're worried about, because it does show that they've thought about it and are very conscious, rather than just, I wrote this character, read it for me. Sometimes that's the case. Like, if there's nothing specific, that's fine. But if there is, I would definitely suggest talking about it and bringing it up. And I haven't actually done that much sensitivity reading, so there's only so much I can say about it. But, and I've been very lucky with what I have had an opportunity to read. So.
Speaking of sensitivity readers, there's actually a website with a list of people who have volunteered, they have added their name to the list in case you might want to ask them, and the website is Writing in the Margins. It's the link is writeinthemargins.org, and there's the sensitivity readers list there if anyone wants to check it out, because those people, at least they'd be willing to read your book if they can, if they're available. On the other hand,
I think that's great because that keeps people from being in the creepy position of reaching out to strangers like I have done. And not being creepy is good. Not that it's always creepy, but I feel like it, and sometimes it is, so yes, yay for research like that. It's great.
It sounds like we're setting the bar so low, but you'd be surprised because not being a creeper on the internet is actually not a low bar.
Like, the top 0.5% of the internet is not a creep.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, on the other hand, what would you like to see more of? More good tropes, more things that are well done?
Oh, Kayla looks like she might want to answer this one.
No, I love this question. I get really not tired of talking about the bad stuff, but like it's important that we talk about it. But I love getting the chance to talk about like what would make me happy.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, it's nice to focus on the good because it does seem like in these conversations online, it's always about. Not complaining isn't the right word, but I feel like so much of what I do and say is all negative, and it's important and it's necessary, but it's so nice to also be constructive and positive. So yeah, I feel you. Yay. For what I want to see more of, I would really like to see some autistic heroes in science fiction and fantasy, please, and well-written ones. Like, mostly, what I want to see more of is good stuff. Like, I mean, that's, not that shocking, but I really just want to see disabled characters where their disability is present and it affects their life, whether positively or negatively, or some mixture of both, which is more often the case. But also there being other parts of the plot. I want to see disabled kids in spy thrillers and in high fantasy. I want them to see the main character and not just the sidekick. And it doesn't mean, like, I don't want to see, oh, and they happen to be disabled. I want them to be disabled and also be this other thing, and those are not mutually exclusive. And you don't have to have one or two references to disability and then never have it happen again. It can affect their life. It can mean that sometimes they can't climb this horrific mountain to fight the demon. Maybe they need to sleep on it for a night because their leg hurts or whatever, or they need some advanced contraption or whatever, Just having them incorporate this into their life the way real-life disabled people do. And so that's really my main thing. Have disability there, not necessarily, but not have it overtake the character, and not have it be the only thing that defines either the plot or the character, not have it be this piteous thing or this obstacle to overcome, just one of the factors in the story and in the character. And do your research.
I think that we're probably all going to say the same thing, because that is also what I would like to see. Particularly in genre, I would like to see more characters with disability. Like, I want to see how a lady knight copes with having OCD, and like, how do you tack up your horse right before like a battle when you have purely obsessional OCD and you have rituals and routines, and what happens when that in a fantasy setting is upset? Like, I want to see that. Someone please write me a lady knight with purely obsessional OCD.
And she's gay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bonus points if she's super queer, like really queer. Yeah, so I want, especially in genre, I think that I want to see more disability, and as Corinne said, present, part of life, affecting life, not mentioned once or twice in the first chapter and then brought up again at the end of the climax because it's now helpful for you as an author. But not, I don't want to say not the point of the story, but not the driving force of the story, that there's an external plot that doesn't have to do with the character's disability. And that because we have not been present enough as heroes of our own stories, and I think that it's really important that we get to.
Yeah, everything that they just said for sure. I won't repeat it, but I will say other things I really, really want. More intersectionality, like fewer just straight white disabled boys, and more everybody else. I want to see more disabled characters written by authors of color, written by queer authors, obviously written by disabled authors, and all of like the combinations thereof. In contemporary, especially, I want to see, like, give me kissing, like, give me fluff and humor and joy in life. Like, issue books are really, really important, and I think that they have a valuable place in the canon. Especially when they're done well and with nuance. But I also want to see just, yeah, like high school drama. Like, oh my gosh. Katie, you're trying to murder us, aren't you?
Rude.
Sorry, keep going.
Oh my god.
You're saying something very important and I interrupted.
Yeah, so I don't even remember what I was saying. Contemporary. Yeah, I want more of everything.
Because
It's so hard to...
into the canon.
Yes.
But fluff is also...
Fluff is so great, and we get so little fluff.
Speaking of fluff.
I knew you were going to do that. I literally, as it was coming out of my mouth, was like, I'm setting her up, and I can't even stop it. Yeah, like, it's so hard to answer this question, even while it's so easy, because we have so little that want more of everything. Like, just all of it. That's why it's so easy, because I can list 25 million things that I want more of, but that's why it's so hard and almost useless to say, because I want more of everything. Minus maybe, like, the bad stuff, you know?
Yes.
Like,
less of the bad stuff and more of the good stuff. I think that's
pretty much. Like, that's basically what we're saying.
But also, like, I mean, I was just saying, like, I want these, you know, these books and characters, and the plot isn't necessarily about their disability. I want them to have other adventures, and I totally do. But right now, a lot of the books that are, like, about disability that are constantly recommended, that are, like, kind of the middle grade and young adult canon, are not actually written by disabled authors. And I've actually not read that many of them yet myself. I'm working on it. But from talking to the disabled people who have read them, a lot of them are not all that great necessarily. So I would really like more of the books, more books that do deal with life as a disabled person, and imagine that in like all caps, or that deal with disability politics or all of that. but I want it to actually be written from a disability politics standpoint and not from the standpoint of an able-bodied person imagining what it's like to be disabled. And that is the case an awful lot, and it's always about overcoming, or it's about how brave they are, it's inspiration porn, or it's just well-intentioned but not quite right. So having actual disability narratives from disabled people that incorporate actual disability politics, and not even necessarily disability pride, although that would be great, but that just understand the things that we're dealing with. That would be great, and I think that's going to be so necessary as well for the teens, because if right now what they keep getting recommended is the disability canon by non-disabled writers, you grow up with such a skewed image, and there is so much out there that smart disabled people are discussing and are passionate about, and they're making the world a better place. And I just want to see more of that in YA. So yeah, I'm being contradictory. I just want everything, and I want it to be really well done, and I want it to be written especially for me and make everybody gay.
Yeah,
that's not too much, right?
I also want to see more in middle grade. I think that there is a lack of this in middle grade as well, and that is an age group where kids are starting to form, they're starting to take in more of the outside world and how they view and shape their own identity, and it's a very vulnerable time for kids with disabilities. It's also the onset of many mental illnesses, so I would like to see more disability lit in middle grade lit. And I guess my last point is, if you're not writing a disabled character, it's still important to check your books for ableist language and to be looking for words that are problematic that we have adopted into our lexicon as slang terms or as something that we don't really think about, but that are really damaging and problematic, regardless of whether that there is a disabled character in your book at any level.
Right, and the excuse used for those words is often, oh, but it's realistic, or oh, but it's how kids talk these days, and that's true. But do you realize what it's like to be a disabled reader and to come across these terms?
Yep.
Like, it feels like getting slapped in the face. Is your realism really so important that you would just replicate these slurs without even thinking about it? And are there really no other words that you can think of that would be just as realistic, but that wouldn't put down an already extremely vulnerable and marginalized group of people, and that wouldn't reinforce this same marginalization?
Yep.
And it's not always easy, and especially in disability narratives, because sometimes people internalize these things. But a lot of the time, it's not necessarily a conscious choice. It's just people have internalized it. They don't think about it. They write it down because it sounds like their characters are, realistic and hip or gritty or whatever, and it's there permanently. And so often, it just doesn't need to be.
I wanted to say one extra thing. Going back to what Corinne said about the importance of disability narratives written from disabled people, and from a disability politics perspective, I feel like, okay, well, full disclosure, that's basically what I'm writing right now. Is it's going to be very much about disability, but with kissing.
Girl kissing.
Yes, the best kind of kissing. But part of why those stories, I feel like, are really, really important, and why the lack of them is so dangerous and damaging, is that a lot of disabled kids don't have any disabled community. They may not know anybody else with their disability, and that can be so very, very isolating, and it means that you don't often have a safe space to sort of explore what your disability means, how it affects your identity, if it does at all. You have no safe place to work through the negatives and the positives and the neutral aspects of disability. And I feel like books can be such a valuable thing in that regard when you don't have a community around you, especially in middle grade and also in young adult. You may not have found your tribe yet. You may not have found the people who you identify with in that regard. So yeah, I think that that could be really, really valuable. And it's something, like Corinne said, that we don't really have yet much of. So yeah, I feel like the issue books that we do tend to get, and I don't want this to sound as harsh as it's going to sound, but I feel like they're very superficial level looking at disability, which is sort of inevitable when you're writing from an able perspective. But I want us to get below that. Like, I want us to dig further down, and I want kids to have that nuanced and safe space to explore their identities and disability.
Yeah.
Those are good points, definitely. And continuing on speaking about good things, could you recommend some books that you think are good examples of representation and have done this well? Corinne is getting ready.
I am indeed. All right, so here's a couple. Gosh, okay, so since Katie was talking about middle grade, let me focus on those. This is Rogue by Lynn Miller-Lackman, which is an Own Voices autism book. It's written by an autistic author about an autistic girl who was having trouble making friends and who's trying to find actual friends who won't dump her within 2 weeks like she used to. And then the friend she does make turns out to have a lot of problems of his own that he's dealing with. There is this one, which came very highly recommended to me by a deaf friend of mine. It's Hurt Go Happy by Ginny Rorby. It's about a deaf girl who has no community, like Kayla says, and whose parents don't want her to learn sign language. And then, of course, the book is about how she does learn sign language and how she does find her own community and her own pride as a deaf person. Also, there's a chimpanzee. Co-Booth, Kind of Like Brothers. It's so great. It's
so cute.
The main character has asthma, and it's his mother often takes in foster kids, and normally these are very, very young. And now she takes in a foster kid his age, so suddenly he has to share his room, and the other guy goes to school with him, and is way cooler than he is, and he just feels very threatened, and they have to learn to get along, and it's great. And
it's super adorable.
It's great. And then one of my favorites is Anne Ursu's The Real Boy, which is, it's a fantasy novel, and it's about an autistic boy, and all the magical shenanigans that are going on in his tiny magical village. There's also this series by Holly Black and Cassandra Clare, The Iron Trial, which is best described as Harry Potter, obviously, and not in a knockoff way, but because it gave me the same happy vibe. There are a lot of elements in common, and they take several of these tropes and they try to do their own thing with them. And in this case, the main character is disabled because he had a foot injury at a very, very young age, so now he walks with a limp. And it's very nicely done, I thought. It's very well integrated into the narrative. It's not ignored. It's not magically cured. That's great.
So it's super fun.
It's super fun, yeah. I'm really enjoying this series.
Adventure, but also in school, but also just greatness. Sorry.
I just bought the Dutch version for my cousin who's 13. And look at how pretty this is. Look at the blue, shiny cover pages.
That's lovely.
Yeah, the Dutch publisher did a really nice job on that one. All right, almost done. Not If I See You First by Eric Lindstrom. It is, it's about a blind girl. Sorry, I was still thinking of Jenny Rorby over there. It's about a blind girl and how she and her ex-boyfriend, it's just a fun teen, high school kind of novel, and I liked it a lot. There's Far From You, which is about a girl trying to find
Stealing my thunder.
Sorry. Trying to find her secret girlfriend's killer. Look at all of us with these books.
I have it here too. Yeah.
And the main character is recovering painkiller addict and has chronic pain and a limp from a car accident. And finally, not finally, I actually had to narrow down this list. 5 Flavors of Dumb by Anthony John, which is about a deaf girl who has to learn to manage high school band whose members don't get along, and she can't really hear the music, but she can still be their manager. I read this a long time ago, but I really enjoyed it, and it was also it was just really, really fun, and it made me want to read more contemporary. And fun is really necessary. And it also came highly recommended by our reviewer on Disability Kidlet. Okay, I'm done. Sorry, I get very excited about these books because it's so rare to find, the good ones. So then I just want to hug them close and at the same time, like, throw them at everybody and possibly cause some bruising because all these books are flying around and falling on their heads. But that's how excited I am.
Okay, so I also had Far From You on my list. This book is amazing. Everyone should read it. Some Kind of Happiness by Claire Legrand is about a girl with anxiety and panic attacks. It's a middle grade. She doesn't have the language for what's happening to her yet and what she's experiencing, which I also think is a really important experience to portray on paper, is that she doesn't know that these are called panic attacks. And she uses a fantasy world as an escape protection type of thing to cope with her family. So it's told both fantasy world and her real life back-to-back pages. So it's a really beautiful, beautiful book, like all of Claire's books, but I also found it to be a really authentic experience of what it's like to have anxiety and panic attacks and to be dealing with a new situation. Her parents are separated and trying to work it out, so they ship her off to people that she's never met before, so that's a really hard situation. Wild Swan is a new book. It's by Jessica Spotswood, and it is beautiful. It's out in paperback already, and it's about a girl who has depression and anxiety, and it's dealt with very authentically in the book. It is also her own voices book. Wild Awake by Hilary Smith is a really fantastic portrayal of hypomania, mania, and depression, and a girl trying to cope with it also without having a lot of the language. So I highly recommend that. That is also an own voices book. Finding fiction to deal with eating disorders is very, very hard in terms of finding stuff that's well done. Winter Girls by Lori Hulse Anderson is very good. I will put a trigger warning on it because it has numbers in it. Very, very mixed about in eating disorder literature. But it's a very, very well done book. That is a really good example of an author who did her research and treated her subject very, very passionately. So I do recommend that book, but with the caveat that if numbers are very triggering for you, don't read it. But if you're reading it to learn how to write a mentally ill character whose decision making you might not agree with, but do it with compassion, that is a really great example.
I did not come prepared with props because I'm a loser, but I do have a list in my brain. So a couple that I was going to talk about have already been brought up, like Far From You, Kind of Like Brothers, The Iron Trial. Other ones that I love, and I have to do it, Corinne, I'm sorry, I have to. Both of Corinne's books.
I bought props when I was going to talk about my own book, but now I will bring props to yours. Oh, look, these are my books.
Thank you. Look at those beautiful books. So both are fantastic in very different ways. One is fantasy, one is sci-fi, but like near future sci-fi, and apocalyptic sci-fi. Anyways, I love them both, and I'm not going to talk about them too much because I don't want to embarrass you, but they are really good.
And like this is the
in the
exact
Highlands in
moment
Scotland, and
that I can't hear what you're saying. You were like, they were really good, and then you're getting really passionate, and I couldn't hear you, and I'm like,
oh no! Basically, I just love them, and I love you, and you're great. That's what I was saying.
I love you too, Fiona. Sorry, go on.
But yeah, so Fox Benwell's book, The Last Leaves Falling, is literally the only assisted suicide narrative I've ever read that I loved wholeheartedly. So the main character is a Japanese teenage boy named Sora, and he has ALS, so Lou Gehrig's disease, which is sort of a distant cousin of what I have. And yeah, it's beautiful and terrible and like so hard to read, but so lovely to read. Like it's so gentle in so many ways, even while it's dealing with incredibly difficult situations and experiences. So I fully recommend that one. The Weight of Feathers by Anna Marie McLemore is beautiful. Just her writing makes me want to die. It's so good. But one of the main characters has I can't remember what it's called, like what she calls it specifically, but his hand was injured when he was younger, so he has limited mobility in his hand, and it's just a really, really beautiful example of how to include disability and culture and like the way those two can intertwine and intersect in really, really fascinating ways. I'm almost done, I swear. So Cody Kaplinger's new book is coming out next Tuesday, soon. And it's called Run, and it is an Own Voices book about a legally blind girl and her best friend, who is also bisexual. And it's a beautiful story about friendship and the ways we can be so very different and so very the same, and how that can like make our connections that much stronger. Also, it's one of the best depictions of a blind character you're ever going to see because voices. And last of all, Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Talk about a fantasy adventure with disability is just so fun and so tense, and oh my gosh, you will swoon throughout and you will be absolutely unable to stop reading it. I think I read it in like literally one night because I just could not. But yeah, it features a character who has PTSD, and there are other disabilities as well. Like he has other disabilities as well. And it's just beautiful, and I love it. Oh, one more. I lied. Sorry. This one is a little unconventional, maybe, but A History of Glitter and Blood by Hannah Moskowitz is so freaking weird in the best possible way, and it handles a lot of various physical and emotional disabilities in a way that I hadn't seen before in a secondary fantasy world that I hadn't seen those sorts of things dealt with. And it also is a really, really good look at the ways war can impact and cause and affect disabilities, but all through fairies and gnomes and tightrope walkers, and it's great and weird. Okay, that's it. Sorry.
I have another one.
It's a really cool book, but really weird.
So this is an anthology that just came out that I'm in. It's not a YA anthology, but there are a lot of YA stories in it, including mine. And it's set actually in the same world, my story, as On the Edge of Gone, which is like a near future big comet impact. So the editors approached me a while ago, obviously, and were like, hey, we would like to do an anthology about disabled characters in the apocalypse. Would you perhaps be interested? And I was like, so you know my next book is about a disabled character in the apocalypse, and it's specifically like all about my own thoughts on disability and how you never see it in the apocalypse because it's assumed that we're all like dead or abandoned or heroically sacrifice ourselves to save other people, because disability is rarely meaningfully dealt with, and disabled lives are typically valued less, so it's just assumed that we all kind of die right away. So like I wrote a 100K novel dealing with this, and then they asked me to write a short story about it, and I was like, okay, actually there were like so many things that I wanted to touch on in the novel that I didn't quite, manage to, because it still did have to be a coherent story and not just me ranting about the things that bother me. So I wrote a short story that is, again, set in the same universe, and I haven't really managed to read a lot yet. I read a couple other short stories, but it's getting amazing reviews, it's got amazing authors, and it's all about disabled people surviving the apocalypse. So yeah, if you're looking for disability in sci-fi, this seems like a really good one, and it's called Defying Doomsday, and it just came out from 12th Planet Press.
And Corinne's story in it is really, really good. Like
It's really freaking good.
Yay.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
so
you.
good.
That's about a girl with spina bifida.
And music. It's about music.
And music. It's about a girl in a shelter, and she decides to start an all-girl rock band because what else are you going to do when the world is ending?
clearly.
kind of.
Okay, we have one question here from the audience. B. Sanders asks, Corinne mentioned the lack of representation around ADD and ADHD, but the overrepresentation of bad portrayals of autism. Why do you think some elements of disability show up so often and some never show up at all?
Really good question.
That is a really good question, and it's one that I have thought about a lot because I get to see, like working with Disability Kit Lit, I get to see numbers a lot because we keep this Goodreads list of books, middle grade and young adult books featuring disabled characters, and we categorize that by disability. So we have a shelf for different conditions. So I can see that the number of books with like characters with ADHD is tiny, and the list of characters, list of books with autistic characters is like way up in the 60s or something. And I think like it's going to be different for a condition. Like weirdly enough, there's not that many wheelchair users, even though that is generally considered the disability symbol, and it's the main thing people think of when they think of disability. I have my thoughts on that, but I think Kayla has her thoughts on that too, so I will leave Kayla to answer that. In terms of autism specifically, I think it's because people are fascinated, honestly. It's this weird kind of fascination. People see people who think differently and who seem all closed off from the world, and they get interested, they get fascinated, like, oh, I wonder what that would be like, or I wonder why they're like that. And, you know, you're a writer, so the wheels, they start spinning, and you think how interesting a character voice like that could be, or what an average narrative would be like if you then put an autistic character in the main role, you know. So I think it's a lot of it is fascination and sort of othering the person, and I also think a lot of it is just that autism is getting a lot of attention in, you know, just in the media. There's all this talk about autism awareness, but most autistic people I know are like, I wish people would be less aware. Please go away, because people are aware, but in all the wrong ways. And there's just so much focus on it that that's a thing that people just go to a little quicker because they are now, unfortunately, more aware of it. Whereas with other conditions, they maybe just don't know about it, or it's just not as interesting for them, or it impedes the plot in some way, according to them. Yes, I see, Kayla. I see you rolling your eyes. No, exactly. So I think like if we're going to have a major campaign about some other condition, then that condition is suddenly going to be overrepresented in books as well. But mostly conditions that deal with like the unknown, like people acting in inexplicable ways, be it autism or epilepsy is another big one. People use it because they see story fodder. They see people who are, you know, in the case of epilepsy, they see people who are suddenly unable to control themselves, who, you know, might, you know, suddenly not be part of the world or whatever, and they just use it. And they might not really stop to think about that for a person with epilepsy or with autism. They're just kind of living their life, and it's not really a huge deal necessarily, you know, because they see it from that outside perspective, and they're fascinated and intrigued, and yeah, it becomes very othering. That's my theory, at least, and there might be other reasons too. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'm just going to agree with Corinne. I think that there is a huge element of how much something is talked about in society that plays out in terms of writers wanting to tap into it. I think that next year in science fiction we're going to see a virus like the Zika virus with children affected like we see the Zika virus affecting kids. I think that's a cycle of what plays out that doesn't make it right, and it certainly doesn't treat people affected by the virus or by, you know, or people who have this disability with any sort of fairness. But I do think that that is something that we see happen, and I know that it happens to me, that I hear a news story and my first thought is, that would make a great story, and then I have to stop myself and say, like, is that my story to tell? Is that hurtful if I tell it? But it's definitely something that I feel happening to me. I think that things like anxiety and depression are really, really prevalent. So people are interested in talking about them, and people who have loved ones who have anxiety disorders or depression want to believe that there is an easy cure, and their way of finding that is through story. And it's hard for me to fault them for wanting that, but the story isn't how you accomplish that. So I think that popular media or personal experience does bring these things into the literary world in a certain way. And there's going to be a cat on my lap in like 2.3 seconds. So, Kayla.
Every time I go to speak, your cats are like, "Look at me, I'm cuter than Kayla," and like, yeah, they're right, but
they're not. They're not.
They are fluffier than Kayla, though.
That's
sorry,
true.
Kayla. They're fluffier.
That's true.
Look at that
Although I got
tail.
some pretty intense fluff going on today.
Do you have a tail like that?
I don't.
That's an amazing tail.
No, that's
okay,
good.
I'm sorry.
I think
Go.
I would be if you had a tail.
Go
Well,
be
again.
smart. Sorry, I get very distracted with this cats.
You don't say.
These girls.
So I have so many thoughts on why we don't have very many wheelchair-using characters, because, like Corinne said, you would think that would be one of those categories that's just overflowing with representation, bad or good, and yet it is not. So I think there's a lot of reasons, but part of the reason is a lack of imagination in a lot of ways. So people typically, when you think about a wheelchair user, they imagine a person who is paralyzed, who has been paralyzed in an accident, and who is dealing with the fallout of having been paralyzed in an accident. And I think that if authors have the thought of, oh, maybe I could write a character who uses a wheelchair, they think about that one narrative, and they're like, oh, it's been done, and they move on. And they don't think about, wait, there are like a million different reasons somebody might use a wheelchair, and there are like a million different narratives that person, that character could go through, and wow, this is a whole world of unexplored potential. And yeah, I think that's a big reason why. I think also what we talked about in terms of genre, of authors seeing those physical kinds of disabilities, particularly more severe ones, as like plot liabilities, is a really real thing. They don't know how, or don't want to figure out how to address it and include it in the narrative in a meaningful way, so they choose not to. And yeah, not a good excuse, but I think that's the reason a lot of times why that happens.
Yeah, they see it as like inconvenient.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Or
or
are you going to have a character run away from the bad guy if they can't run? Well, that's
Right.
going to be too difficult for the story. Let's just not.
yeah, and I think that that's such a waste, because that's your chance to be creative. Like, that's your, like, one of the things I think that disabled people as a group, and I hate to generalize, but I feel like as a group we're very good at innovation. We have to be. Like, we have to be able to adapt to our environments, to our situations, to the people around us. And I feel like that's so useful for a writer, or it could be, to like tap into that spirit of adaptation and innovation, and like use that in your stories in really creative ways. Use that in your fantasy worlds and your sci-fi worlds, and just use it in the everyday contemporary worlds. Like, that's such a waste. I think that people don't think about that and don't use it in a storytelling manner. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts. I have others, but I will stop talking now.
And I think it might be, like, to get back to the question specifically about autism and ADD, because I've been thinking about it more. Autism presents, like, I think they see autism as presenting more story opportunities than ADD, because it's, you know, ADD probably gets in the way of it more because you just have a character who's like, all right, let's do this. What's that? And again, now I'm making terrible jokes about my own condition, but I can do that. So I think it's also, honestly, like, I've been meaning to write a character with ADD, but I do think it can get difficult to write and or read about, because you do keep getting the narrative, you know, you're stuck in this person's mind and this person can't focus. So then when you have narrative, it might be a bit disjointed, it might be a bit repetitive, but hey, well, that's what life is like when you have this condition. But unlike autism, it doesn't also come with this other side that provides more opportunities in the same way. And like a lot of books about autism are written by people who are parents of autistic kids. And some cases this is done very, very well, like The Real Boy by Anna Sue, who has an autistic son. And in other cases, it's done really, really terribly, like in the case of several books that I'm not going to name. And
Which you should probably find on our site somewhere.
Oops. But there's also a very popular book about a disabled character, which I'm also not going to name because I haven't read it yet, and there's no review for it yet, so I'd like to wait before I talk about that in too much detail. But that was started by the author and her daughter, I think, were out, and the daughter saw this disabled person and didn't react well to it. And then the parent was like, wow, I wonder what... The parent felt very embarrassed to begin with, and then wondered what that would be like, living like that. And they wrote the book, and they never talked to a person who actually had the condition while writing the book. So again, that's just an element of the story brain, which, like Katie said, I have this thing too. I'm like, oh wow, that's so interesting, and I want to know more about it, and I want to put myself in this person's position, and I think of all the things you can do with it story-wise, or character arc-wise, narrative-wise. But it's not just a spark and you can imagine the rest. It's an actual experience that thousands, millions of people throughout the entire world have. And how you approach this might actually affect how people see the people with that condition. So I hate to think of writers as having responsibility or a duty or anything, because it's all about the story in the end. But you do have to acknowledge that these stories hold weight. So you can't just stop at, oh, hey, this is interesting, and then build your story from there with zero research into either the actual condition or the people or the tropes. I'm getting a little bit off topic, but Curious Incident is similarly, the author did no research. He just thought it would be really cool, like, how can you spice up a narrative like this? Well, what if I use an autistic kid? And, so many people love the book. But that doesn't really take away that you need more than fascination and imagination to craft a character.
Amen.
Yeah.
Does anyone have anything to add? Because I think we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm going to keep talking with you guys.
I mean, if anybody has any questions, you can always reach out to the three of us on Twitter. We are always on Twitter, especially when we have books due.
Oh my god, that's so true.
You can always ask us, and if you want to reach out to us privately, just let us know.
Yes.
Yep.
Kayla, do you see the one question there? Because I want you to write a post about that, because that's interesting.
I don't see the question.
Oh, well, we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, we don't have time for more questions.
No,
I'll share the questions with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you, and goodbye, everyone.
This was really
Bye.
great.
Thank you.
It was Cat.
Cat.
Bye, Katie.
Cat. Bye-bye.
Dragon cat.
So I'm Kayla Whaley. I was born with a disease that's called spinal muscular atrophy, type 3, for the specific kind. It's a form of muscular dystrophy. Essentially, it means that my muscles are weaker than most people's. So I stopped walking at age 6, and I use a power wheelchair. I also recently was diagnosed with depression. But yeah, that's me. I'm also, along with Bryn, an editor at Disability Kidlit, and I haven't yet written much about disability in terms of fiction, although I'm working on it, but my essays almost entirely deal with disability. So
that was going to be my next question. If you as a writer have written about disability, whether in fiction or non-fiction, and if you want to talk a bit about it.
In my debut novel, Otherbound, which is a fantasy young adult novel that came out 2 years ago, almost to the day, it was 2 years on Friday, happy anniversary,
Happy anniversary.
There are two protagonists, and one has an amputated foot, and the other had her tongue cut out at a very young age. So they both deal with disability in a different way. And in my second novel, On the Edge of Gone, which is a young adult science fiction novel that came out this March, the main character is autistic. And I've also got several novels in the works featuring characters with everything from...
Hello everyone, I'm sorry for the delay. We had some technical problems, but let's start. Let's talk about disability. In lieu of an introduction, if you're comfortable talking about it, what's your personal experience with disability?
Well, I was diagnosed with autism when I was 14 and with ADD when I was 23, and I've had a lot of on and off mental health issues. I write disabled characters pretty much exclusively at this point, which wasn't a conscious choice but just kind of happened. And I am a co-founder and moderator of Disability in Kidlit, which, as you could probably guess from the name, discusses disability in children's literature. I think that's it.
So is it my turn now that we don't have
Yes.
Fox? Okay.
Yeah, Fox.
I am trying to find. Okay. I'm Catherine Locke. I have had mental illnesses my entire life. I had an eating disorder for 12 to 14 years, depending on who you ask, myself or my therapist. And I also have an autoimmune disease.
Is it my turn? Okay. I couldn't
Yes,
tell if you were
okay.
still talking. Because
No,
I think really...
yeah.
Okay. Great book that is not out yet. Obviously, I don't have any books out yet. But that anxiety is a thread through it, even though it's not the main point of the book. And I'm currently working on a YA romance that stars a wheelchair user, which I'm very excited about.
I'm so excited about that one too. It's going to be
Thank
amazing.
you.
I love the Twitter book.
Same.
So yeah, we'll see how that goes, but that's what I'm working on right now.
What are some of the tropes you've seen which are hurtful and disrespectful?
Okay, so I have been doing Disability Kitlit for almost 3 years now, so I can talk about this for literally 3 years, and I'm still going. So that's kind of hard to answer in such a short amount of time, so I'll just focus on my own conditions right now. So for autism, one of the big tropes is commonly held belief in real life, which is autistic people don't have empathy, which is usually wrong in like 99% of cases, and also extremely damaging and harmful. And with autism, the main thing is also that most novels featuring autistic characters focus instead on all the characters around them and how autism affects the sister or the parents or whatever, and the autistic character themselves is mostly just a prop for other people's characters, which deafness to anxiety to lots and lots of other things, so it's kind of a toss-up which will get published first of those. But those two novels are the big ones right now.
I wrote a new adult series called the District Ballet series. The first book is Second Position, the second book is Finding Center, and then there's a prequel novella called Turning Point. And in those books, the heroine, Allie, is recovering from an eating disorder and has pretty severe depression and anxiety. And in Second Position and Finding Center, and this isn't too much of a spoiler, Zed, after a car accident, is a left leg amputee above the knee, and he uses a prosthetic and crutches. So I wrote those books first. My young adult book does not have somebody with the young adult book coming out next year does not have somebody with a disability, but the book following that, my 2018 book, does. So I'm working it in writing queer Jewish girls with various mental health issues pretty much as far as I can see down the line.
So yeah, like I mentioned, I have written a fair number of essays about my own disability, / disabilities, but I haven't yet written any fiction much with it. I have a middle grade.
Is also not a great thing, and the autistic behaviors are generally just reduced to thoughtless stereotypes. Like there's never a reason behind it. It's just some funny thing the autistic character does because they're autistic, even though we always have reasons for what we do. And in terms of ADD, it's actually not portrayed in fiction all that often, so there aren't that many stereotypes or tropes. But I think the main thing is that people will see ADD only as the funny ADHD, haha, oh look, a squirrel, which is hilarious because as Katie and Kayla can both testify, I go, oh my god, it's a squirrel, like a lot.
Quite literally.
Really like squirrels.
I really like squirrels, okay? But I don't really, I haven't really seen any characters in fiction with that I can sympathize with in that aspect because none of them have the type of ADD that I do, which is so much more about distractibility and inability to make decisions, inability to focus, all of that stuff. And you just don't see that at all, really, unfortunately.
The first thing I should say, since they probably won't say it, is that writers who are interested in writing disability should definitely check out Disability in Kidlit. There are really good interviews on there, and there are book reviews and discussions about tropes. It's probably the #1 resource for writing and reading about disability in all levels of children's literature. So definitely check it out.